The time to Mr. Murtha.
Apparently, a number of people have not read this bill. I know my friend Bill Young has read it. We have $1.5 billion to cover the full cost of housing allowances for the troops. If you vote against this, you're voting against housing allowances. We have a total of $2.3 billion in this bill to cover the full cost of fielding an additional 36,000 Army troops and 9,000 Marines. If you've read this bill, you'll realize we added $2 billion to address the training and equipment shortfalls in the forces not deployed. $1 billion is dedicated to purchase Army National Guard equipment. If you vote against it, you're voting against $1 billion for the National Guard. You're voting against an additional $750 million for Afghanistan. You're voting against $2.4 billion for the Joint IED Task Force. In procurement, you're voting against the very thing that the military wants most, and that's the new vehicle with the V shape, which is resistant to IEDs. Now, let me talk a little bit about IEDs. In the last 4 months, we have lost more troops than any other period during this war. And I'm sorry to hear from a friend of mine's wife who called me and said there was a joke on one of the shows last night of a Republican presidential candidate who said that he brought an IED back and he put it under this guy's desk. That individual owes an apology to every troop that serves in Iraq. When we go to the hospital, all of us, we see burn victims, we see victims that are wounded badly, and many of us don't get an opportunity to see families. I went to Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, and Fort Stewart. These folks are burned out. The truancy rate's up in the schools. The achievement is down in the schools where our troops' children go. One soldier said to me, first sergeant, a woman, she says, I hate to tell my children I'm going back to Iraq. They're going back the third and fourth time. A general said to me, I can only take 9 months. And we're back for 15. I hear rumors that they're going to extend them to 18 months. We have an accountability bill. This is called the Iraq Accountability Bill. This war has been so mismanaged that we have the responsibility to force the White House to be accountable. The policy is not set by the military. The policy is set by the White House. And we have to hold the White House accountable for the mistakes that they have made. We will have appropriated $1.2 trillion for the Defense Department in 1 year. We're spending nearly $10 billion a month in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have 126,000 contractors. And it took us 2 months. The committee that funds every cent that is spent in Iraq and Afghanistan had to spend 2 months to find out there were 126,000 contractors. And we told this to the Secretary of Defense, and he said, when one of the members of Congress said, and one of them was making $300,000 a year, one of the contractors, he said, that's more than I make. Imagine we got a contractor making more than the Secretary of Defense makes. We have a contractor that I saw when I talked to the first the cavalry division that was in Iraq. Here's a guy pumping gas. This is what a soldier told me. He gets $25,000 a year, and right beside him was a guy pumping gas for $80,000 a year. This is what I call accountability. We have to hold the White House responsible for accountability. Why do they have 126,000 contractors? Because we don't have enough troops. Why are they extending the troops to 18 months, possibly? And finally, they realized they couldn't send them back before they had a year at home. They had to be trained and they had to be equipped. That's what we say in this bill. We say you got to be trained and equipped. I had General Pace come up after the last hearing. I said, General, you got to tell me you're not sending any troops back that aren't trained and equipped. And I don't know this conversation made the difference, but a short time later, they announced they're going to extend people, and they're not going to send anybody back unless they have a year at home. It's absolutely essential. I talked to some of the wives at Fort Bragg, and I got one story from the hospitals about how the service was there. They were able to get service anytime they wanted. Within a week, they were able to get service. Then I went in and talked to the wives, the officers' wives. I said, how many of you, after talking to her for a while, how many of you got service in a week? No hands went up. How many did it take over a month? Half the hands went up. We've got to take care of the people at home. Let me tell you something. I get fatigued in going to the hospitals. The caregivers that care for them every day, think what they go through. A nurse called me and said, you've got to put some money in the bill, and we did, to take care of caregivers, to give them some relief. These caregivers see it every day. So we put $1 million in for Lawn Stool, a program. We put $1 million in for Walter Reed, for Brooks, and for Bethesda. They are burned out. The troops are burned out. What we're trying to do in this bill is hold the White House accountable for the policy mistakes that they've made. We went into Iraq without weapons of mass destruction. I believed it. When I went there the first time, I saw a line drawn around Baghdad, and they told me they were going to use biological weapons. I believed that. It took me 6 or 7 months to realize we'd made a mistake. We went to Afghanistan, was the right place to go. I'm inspired by these troops. I'm inspired by their families, but they're burned out, and they're bearing as much as they can bear. But when we sit here, and one of the previous speakers said we, I hear this all the time. We're fighting terrorists. We're not fighting terrorists. We're sitting here in an air-conditioned place while they're out there in dust. And let me tell you about the policy in this latest deployment. I worried. I didn't say anything public, but I worried. When you send 37 different elements out by themselves among the Iraqis, when you got interpreters who you don't trust, you're going to expect the kind of disasters you just saw. That's the thing that worries me, when you don't have enough troops. And one general said to me, he said, if you're there more than 9 months, you start making mistakes. Imagine what he's saying. You start making, he said, I questioned myself after 9 months. A psychologist told us who came before the committee, he said 3 months in heavy combat, 3 months of going out every day and having IEDs. Imagine a presidential candidate making a joke about IEDs when these kids are blown apart. It's outrageous. Let me tell you something. We owe a great debt of gratitude to these families and these young people who are doing the fighting. It's not we doing the fighting, it's them doing the fighting. And they deserve accountability from the Congress of the United States, and we're going to demand that in this accountability bill.
The gentleman's time has expired.